On the show today, we have Dr. Janna Koretz, and here is why she is awesome. She's the founder and a licensed psychologist at Azimuth Psychological, a Boston-based therapy practice focused on the unique mental health challenges of those in high-pressure careers. High pressure will be a key word for this conversation. Her insights have been featured in various publications: Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, BBC, Business Insider, list. Additionally, she has contributed articles in CO World magazine discussing topics such as psychological safe work cultures. And my little fun tidbit about her that I like the most is this children's book on anxiety called Heroic Henrietta: How One Unicorn Overcame Her Anxiety. Hello, Janna.
Hi. Wow, you did your research. You found that one.
And a big breath because I knew I had a lot to get through. Yeah.
Yes.
So interesting. We're going to talk about high pressure roles. And I'm curious from jobs that are always high pressure, jobs that are high pressure once in a while. Really curious how to lead through those things. But before we get to that, you have to not get off the hook. You get the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Oh, there's so many to choose from. I think in terms of worst employee experience, I think there are a couple stories that come to mind, and I think they all get grouped in the bucket of entitlement. I think that is a personal pet peeve of mine that I don't care for. And I think we'll get to it, but I think a lot of people don't know how to communicate well in the workplace. And as the leader, I find I'm trying to be very flexible around that because that's my job, right? And to help people with that. But every so often somebody will say something and I am not interested in hearing it because it is quite entitled. And so and the short example is she doesn't work with me anymore, so I can talk about it. This one employee of mine said she had just started, she had a lot of time in her calendar, we were just getting her clients, and I asked her to do something that was very relevant to her career that really would help her in general. And she just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That seems like a lot of work. I don't really want to do that. I'm not going to do that." I said, well, I don't know if it's optional. As the leader, then you have to be like, well, how am I going to respond to that, right? And so that's a tricky situation for anyone. But there are a lot of instances where people have asked me for things or demanded things of me or refused things that I find are pretty inappropriate for a workplace setting. And that is where I personally struggle. So those tend to be what fall into my worst employee stories.
And how do you combat that proactively? Like in my brain, I'm a communications nerd, and you've already even mentioned, we've been in 3 minutes here, and you've already mentioned how important communication is. Is it setting boundaries right out of the gate so that there's no confusion later on? Or does that matter at all and people are going to jump to their own conclusions of what they're entitled to or not?
I think it's both. I think that setting an appropriate sort of workplace expectations from the beginning is important. And that's actually something that has been a growing edge for myself. This is how accommodating the company can be. This is what is not optional, and like really being boundaried and showing examples of that from the beginning. So when people start to push boundaries in the beginning, you can say, no, actually, that's not how it works here, in a nice way, and kind of make sure that those expectations get really, really solid in the beginning so that those situations don't arise in the future because they know that it's not something that is possible in this particular work culture. I think a whole other conversation for another time is also like generational expectations of the workplace, which are different. And so I think some of that stuff happens anyway. And I'm now of the generation where I can say the younger generation is so different than my generation. And so that has also been something that I think we read a lot about Gen Z and how that works and what is appropriate to them or what their expectations of life is a lot different. And so I think if you're a little bit older, like you're going to hear some of that anyway. That's what it's going to feel like, even if that's not the intention all the time. And so I think you can do a lot of work at the beginning to lay that foundation. But I think in the end, like you're never going to get away from requests that are interesting.
I love that as we're getting older, I'm feeling like we're giving longer answers, academic answers to kids today. Like it's just...
Yes. Kids today. I just wrote an article about kids today, actually. Yeah, it's true.
And it's a struggle because there is a lot of work we have to do that is strategic leadership, proactive, boundary setting. And then there's the other side of it that is we're human and we go, God, can't you just get this? Like, why is this complicated? It's right there in your job description. I don't understand. Yeah, I hear it's a struggle. Mm-hmm. It's a struggle.
It is a struggle. And one thing I will add, which we don't need to get into, but I think is interesting, is if you think about how Gen Z grew up with like social media, iPhones, like all these things that we didn't have. They grew up in a very self-centered, focused culture. what do I look like on the internet? How many likes did I get? What do I need to do to be an influencer, right? It's all about me. And so it's not really that surprising. And then you add in like COVID and work from home and all these things where they're not necessarily learning professional skills anyway. So you get people into a situation where their personal culture, it's like any other culture, right? Their personal culture is more self-centered than maybe perhaps other cultures in the past. That's not really their fault, but they don't necessarily know they haven't been told how to interact with us, right? And we haven't been told how to interact with them in a way that is helpful. And so of course there's just these, I don't know, rifts, I guess, because that's how they've been. That's how they've been taught their whole life.
And add helicopter parents on top of that, and add parents that are enabling that behavior and not setting those boundaries. It's an ecosystem of, for us, having to figure that out and figure out how to deal is a horrible word, how to interact and understand these other generations. One thing I
help them succeed. Right? They're not going to succeed if they like are in these work environments where they're doing things that older people don't like.
And I've said this before on the show too, is it's not always just a Gen Z problem. I've seen more entitled boomers than I've seen sometimes with Gen Z.
Oh, yeah.
They just want to work. They just have particular understanding of how they want to work and way it works. And I've seen older generations, Gen X, me included, going, but that's not how it's always been done before. So it's just this cycle of trying to better understand who we're working with out there. Look at this transition. Watch this. When the things happen where people have different understandings and definitions of things, we're getting into definitions now.
I'm with
high
you.
pressure and what you would define as high pressure and what I might define as high pressure could be very different, especially based on generational lines. So for the basis of this conversation, how would you define a high pressure workplace?
I don't think you're going to like my answer, which is I'm not actually defining it at all, right? The people that come to see us, they define it for them. Does it feel high pressure to them? And what does that mean to them? And that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. I mean, certainly we have sort of the stereotype of what you and I might consider high pressure, right? Like we have people are trying to be a partner in corporate law. We have people in private equity, right? And like all these finance, all these jobs that people sort of stereotype into high pressure careers because they are. But there are a lot of people who the work culture in America is terrible. So it doesn't actually matter what industry you're in because most of the time now it is a high pressure situation. Even if we read all the time about like Amazon warehouse workers, right? That is an incredibly high pressure job that is almost impossible to succeed at. And people need those jobs. And so they tolerate it or they try to figure it out. It doesn't really matter what industry or what it is. I think in general, we have this kind of low level, high pressure culture of work. And then it sort of depends on how people relate to their work, what other factors are involved, their financial situation, all that.
So by not defining high pressure, because again, we go back, it's a personal thing and high pressure, you have to treat it as per the person and how they're looking at it. But does that mean you're not defining low pressure jobs or a threshold between the two? If we're not defining the upper, then does that mean you're not defining the lower?
Because what we're doing is helping people with their symptoms.
Right.
And so it sort of doesn't matter like how I would define it or what is a low or is a high pressure career or whatever. It's like they come in and they say, I feel like really stressed out because I feel pressure from this and this. And so that is sort of the crux of it. And so I know that like defining things is actually really important. I really like to define things, but also as a therapist, there are a lot of things that are undefined or gray, including this sort of, I think what we're talking about, right? Because it is subjective, in my opinion.
So what are we misunderstanding about high pressure? Is it the fact that if you have a big paycheck and you're top of the organization, those are the only places that are high pressure? Well, them and air traffic controllers. Is that because I can understand a lot of people, you talk about Amazon workers, I'm nodding, I'm totally agreeing with you, but it's not top of mind of what I would think is a high pressure job.
I think people, again, like when they think about what we do as a company, like at Azimuth, right? Yes, we have the people that everyone would typically consider to be in a high pressure career, right? Like C-suite people, VPs of consultants, all this. But it is anybody and everybody. We have academia, we do have people in healthcare, we have people I don't know how many of them are now, but we have had people who have worked in like Amazon warehouses or jobs like that, which arguably in some ways are more high pressure in different ways. And so I don't think like how we understand it, like what is top of mind almost isn't as important as how people feel when they're at work, if you will.
So what are symptoms of high pressure? They're coming to you for a reason. Mm-hmm. So how is this showing up?
A lot of it shows up in burnout, apathy, a lot of high anxiety, unable to put work away, career enmeshment, feeling stuck. A lot of people have a lot of financial obligations one way or another, and they can't get out of the job that they're in. Or a lot of people, I think we see a lot of people too, this is more of a story, less of a symptom. They've had a track that they've been told is really important, and they check all the boxes, they do all the things, they get to where they're going, they've arrived, and they're really miserable. And that's super confusing and very scary for them. And there's an existential piece to that. A lot of people sometimes will have a company acquisition or they're laid off and they have nothing. Like they don't even know what to do with their time. Like they can't even get out of bed because all they've done is work. All they know is work. That's their whole identity. Mm-hmm. And so now they're in this existential place where they are very confused and they're upset and they start drinking. And so there's sort of subsequent things that happen as well. So those are the heavy hitters, I think, but it really can manifest in any way. I mean, stress in general, right? Trauma, things like that manifest in all kinds of ways. But I think those are the typically when people come in, that's sort of how they're experiencing things.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm super curious about when it comes to high pressure, is it the pressure we put on ourselves or is it the pressure the organization is putting on the individual? That both. Seems both. Yeah, I figured. There are a lot of people that can handle high pressure things.
Right. Right. And so this is people always, well, there are some people who thrive in that environment. And certainly there are. And I think the people I think of first when I think of that are physicians or doctors, for example. That's where they thrive. That's the place. Like they don't want to be in pediatrics. They would be so bored. They want to be, and that is where they thrive. And that's okay. It's fine if it's not problematic for you. But most of the people in this world, pressure like that is problematic for them. And that's why they don't choose things like being an ER doctor, for example.
Did they know it's because of a high pressure situation or are they just going, help me do my job better? Is there self-awareness around that piece? Or is it just my job's hard, I need to meditate and journal more, fix me?
There's usually some insight. And I would say most of our clients are really smart and they know they should meditate and eat better. And a lot of them have been to therapy before and have heard that, right? And part of the problem is they can't because their lifestyle doesn't allow for that. And they can't just quit their job or they can't just work less or they really don't have time to cook. Like these are all really true facts about them. And so they feel like therapy or like wellness is not possible for them. Right. When really it is, it's just you have to do it much more creatively and in smaller increments. And I think people typically when they come in, they know there's a problem. Something is a problem for them, whether it's their job or themselves, like maybe they're not sure, but they definitely, most of the time people don't say, oh, I have this anxiety, fix me and everything will be fine. Sometimes that happens, but oftentimes there's like at least some kind of awareness of the situation or my environment or this other person at work or like my wife or something else is also contributing.
And I'm not poo-pooing the journaling and the meditating. I'm a huge fan of both of those things. I think they're essential.
Let me tell you, as somebody who is not a natural journaler or whatever, journaler. Or somebody, yes, and not somebody who is a naturally meditator. These are not things that come naturally to me, nor was I very interested in them when I first heard about them. We now have a journaling app because I am so on board with journaling and values journaling and all of this because it is really helpful, but also you have to get past the stereotype of what journaling is. And you have to get past the idea that it has to be every day and you have to log your whole day and you have to, especially now with social media, there are all these people online who tell you all these things that you have to do and it's just not right. Yeah. for everything, but definitely not for wellness stuff either.